You will not believe what my 75-year-old grandma did online, and I was forced to watch. She hid secrets so brutal, so shocking, that most people would be too afraid to try them. Some of the things she taught me could ruin you, or make you rich beyond imagination. She laughed while I made mistakes. She smiled as I questioned morality, and she showed me tricks I never thought were possible. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly how far a grandma can go, and what I learned could change everything you thought you knew about the internet. I had never imagined that my grandmother could astonish me in a way that would completely upend everything I thought I knew about her, until that morning when I opened the door to the kitchen and found her perched in the corner, fingers flying over a keyboard, surrounded by stacks of crumpled papers, loose notebooks, and a small, half-empty teacup that had been there for days, as if she had never slept. And on the screen in front of her danced a dizzying array of numbers, charts, and lines that looked more like the schematics of a spaceship than anything a 75-year-old should understand. She did not even glance at me, which in itself was unusual, because my grandmother had always looked at me when I entered the room, eyes sharp behind thick glasses, as if she could read my mind before I could even think a thought. This morning, however, she was different. Serious, focused, absorbed in something I could not name but felt instinctively must be important. The sight was so bizarre, so shocking, that for a moment I could not move. I leaned against the doorway, my curiosity warring with my disbelief. "Grandma," I finally said, my voice tentative. What are you doing?" She paused for only a second, one finger hovering over the keyboard, and then turned to me with a smile that seemed almost mischievous in its serenity. "I'm teaching the internet to make money," she said matter-of-factly, as if telling me the weather. And I laughed, a short, nervous laugh that sounded more like a cough, because surely she could not possibly mean what I thought she meant. Grandmothers did not make money on the internet. Grandmothers baked cookies, knitted scarves, told stories about the old days, and occasionally scolded you for forgetting to eat breakfast. They did not trade currencies, analyze charts, or write cryptic messages on online platforms that seemed like secret codes to the untrained eye. "Wait," I said, stepping closer, trying to peer at the screen without seeming too intrusive. "Are you investing? Or what exactly?" She returned her gaze to the screen, her hands moving with a speed and confidence I had never seen before. "Not just investing," she said calmly, almost as if she were bored. "I'm creating opportunities. I'm building systems, and I'm teaching others to do what I do. And soon, you will understand it too." I wanted to laugh again, but the look in her eyes stopped me. It was the same sharp, unwavering gaze she had used when she taught me to ride a bicycle 50 years ago. The gaze that made fear vanish and replaced it with a strange combination of courage and awe. I knew, in that moment, that this was not a joke. And so began the most unexpected chapter of my life, one that I could never have foreseen, in which my grandmother, the woman who had always seemed so ordinary, so bound by age and tradition, became the most extraordinary mentor I had ever known. At first, it was slow. She did not throw me into the deep end. Instead, she guided me through the basics, showing me websites, platforms, and tools that were as alien to me as a foreign language. "This is how you read numbers," she would say, pointing at lines of figures that shifted constantly. "And this is how you find patterns. Do you see the pattern?" I squinted, tried to focus, but most of the time I saw only chaos. "No," I admitted, feeling stupid, but she only smiled. "Then watch more carefully. You will see what others miss." Days turned into weeks, and slowly my understanding grew. I learned that her systems were not magic. They were logic, discipline, and insight applied consistently. And yet there was a kind of artistry to it, a rhythm that she seemed to feel intuitively. While I struggled to keep up, she moved with effortless grace, typing, calculating, analyzing, and even laughing quietly when a sudden shift in the market or a strange error produced a result she had not expected. The house changed as well. The kitchen became her command center, and I found myself drawn there more often than anywhere else. The stacks of papers began to resemble maps, notes meticulously organized, strategies and algorithms sketched in the margins. She taught me to observe carefully, to question assumptions, to recognize opportunities in places most people dismissed. The internet is not just a place to waste time, she told me, her voice steady. It is a world where knowledge becomes power if you know where to look. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, she would pause and look at me with a strange, almost wistful expression. "You know," she said one night, stirring her tea absent-mindedly, "when I was your age, I never imagined I would be here. Not in this way. I thought life would be slow, predictable. But life has surprises for those who are willing to see them." I nodded, not fully understanding, because at that age, my own life felt endless and obvious. The future, a straight path I could walk without fear. But I was beginning to see that her life had been full of invisible lessons, experiences, and secrets, and that the knowledge she was sharing now had taken decades to accumulate. Then came the day when she handed me my first small assignment. It was deceptively simple. Follow a particular market trend, analyze its history, and predict a minor fluctuation. I worked on it for hours, staring at charts and graphs, cross-referencing numbers, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. And when I finally presented my analysis to her, she nodded, not with the approval of a teacher, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who sees the potential in a young apprentice. "Good," she said softly. "You see patterns now. You are ready for more." The more I learned, the more I realized how far ahead she was. My friends would talk about stock apps and online trends in vague terms, and I would nod, pretending to understand, while inside I was thinking of my grandmother, sitting calmly at the kitchen table, orchestrating invisible transactions, building networks, and quietly laughing at how little anyone else could grasp. There was a thrill in this, a rush that made me feel both small and powerful at the same time, a paradox that I could not quite reconcile. She also taught me the human side of this strange digital world. "It is not just numbers," she would say. "It is people. Every action has a reaction, every trend a cause. Learn to understand both, and you will not only survive, you will thrive." She told stories of online communities, of people she had helped and mentored anonymously, of small fortunes made and lost, and of the discipline required to succeed in a realm that seemed chaotic but was structured for those willing to study it carefully. At night, when the house was quiet, I would lie awake thinking about the day's lessons. It was intoxicating and terrifying. I felt like I had been given a key to a world I had never known existed, a world of possibility and danger, excitement and meticulous calculation. And all the while, my grandmother, who should have been resting, living out the quiet rhythms of age, was thriving, sharp and alert, a beacon of intelligence in a world that most dismissed as too complex for someone of her age. One evening, after a particularly long session, I asked her how she had discovered all this, how she had learned to navigate such a complex digital landscape at a time when many of her peers struggled with even the simplest gadgets. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and amusement. "Curiosity," she said simply. And the refusal to accept limits. You see, most people stop learning when it becomes difficult. I never did. I felt a surge of admiration that was difficult to articulate. Here was a woman who had lived through wars, scarcity, and countless personal challenges, yet who now moved effortlessly through a world that had been unimaginable in her youth. And more than that, she was willing to teach me, a teenager barely able to manage my homework, how to step into that world, how to claim a small measure of that power for myself. The weeks turned into months, and my skills improved, slowly but steadily. I began to understand the nuances of what she taught, to recognize patterns she pointed out, to anticipate minor shifts in trends, to think several steps ahead. And with each small success, my confidence grew, though it was tempered by the constant reminder of her wisdom, that patience, discipline, and observation were more important than any single triumph, and that arrogance or greed could undo everything in an instant. By the time I had mastered the basics, I realized something astonishing. I had changed. The timid, uncertain teenager who had stumbled into the kitchen months ago was no longer the same. I saw opportunities where I had once seen chaos, patterns where I had once seen randomness, and I felt a deep, almost reverent respect for the woman who had led me here, who had transformed not just my understanding of the digital world, but my perception of life itself. And then, one night, she smiled at me in a way I had never seen before, her eyes reflecting something I could not name.
"Soon," she said quietly, "you will understand why I brought you here, and why I trusted you with this knowledge. But you must be ready. Everything we have done, everything you have learned, is only the beginning."
The following days were unlike anything I had experienced. My grandmother's lessons intensified, each one pushing me further than I thought I could go. She no longer simply guided me through the basics. Now she expected me to anticipate outcomes, make decisions, and even take risks, small at first, then increasingly significant. "The internet rewards courage," she said one evening, her voice calm but firm. "But it punishes hesitation." I remember the day she introduced me to my first real challenge. She handed me a laptop with a screen full of fluctuating numbers, trading platforms, and real-time notifications, and said, "You are going to make your first independent transaction. Mistakes are acceptable, but hesitation is not." My heart pounded, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The stakes felt enormous, even if the amount involved was modest. I had studied her methods, practiced patterns, and memorized strategies, but nothing could prepare me for the weight of real responsibility. As I typed, clicked, and adjusted values, I could feel my palms sweat. Every second stretched into eternity. Then, almost imperceptibly, I noticed a pattern she had pointed out weeks ago. A minor fluctuation in one market that correlated with a larger movement elsewhere. My mind raced, piecing together everything I had learned. I made the decision, I pressed enter, and froze, waiting for the result. The screen updated slowly, my stomach twisting. Then, almost immediately, the numbers shifted in my favor, and a small smile crept onto my face. My grandmother watched silently, her eyes soft but unreadable, and when she finally nodded, I felt a rush of triumph unlike anything I had ever known. Over the next few weeks, my confidence grew, but so did the complexity of my lessons. She introduced me to social media strategies, content creation, affiliate marketing, and subtle manipulations of online trends. She taught me to read not just numbers, but emotions, reactions, and psychology. demonstrating how a single post, a well-placed comment, or even a subtle suggestion could ripple through digital communities, affecting behaviors and decisions. At first, I found it overwhelming. The world she revealed was vast, intricate, and constantly changing. But with each lesson, I began to see its structure, the invisible threads connecting people, decisions, and outcomes. One night, as we were reviewing my progress, she paused and looked at me with a seriousness I had rarely seen.
"There is something you must understand," she said, her tone unusually grave. "This world is not forgiving. People will exploit your mistakes, markets will punish your arrogance, and emotions will cloud your judgment. Do not underestimate the consequences." Her words chilled me. The lessons had always felt like an adventure, exciting and stimulating, but now I sensed the weight of responsibility pressing down on me, a subtle reminder that what we were doing was not a game. Then came an unexpected turn. One evening, as I was reviewing a complex series of trends, I noticed something strange on the screen. An unusual pattern that I had not seen before, one that seemed almost deliberate, like a signal. I showed it to my grandmother. She studied it silently, her fingers drumming on the edge of the desk. "Interesting," she murmured. "You've stumbled upon something few notice. Most would dismiss it, but you saw it." She explained that it was an anomaly, an opportunity hidden in plain sight, and that acting upon it required intuition as much as knowledge. My pulse quickened. This was no longer about learning, it was about seizing possibilities that could change everything. The very next day, she guided me through exploiting this anomaly, showing me step by step how to leverage it without drawing attention. The process was delicate and required a careful balance of risk and observation. I felt like a tightrope walker, stepping carefully over an abyss I could not see, but each successful move reinforced my trust in her wisdom. When it was over, the result was staggering. A small fortune gained quietly, the kind of success that could easily go unnoticed, but marked a turning point for me. I felt a mixture of awe and fear. The power of this world was intoxicating, yet dangerous, and I sensed that my grandmother had deliberately pushed me to confront it. In the following weeks, we worked together almost obsessively. I became fluent in the language of digital markets, able to recognize patterns, predict minor shifts, and even anticipate reactions from online communities. My grandmother's methods were meticulous, blending logic, psychology, and intuition, and I absorbed them with an eagerness that surprised even me. Nights blurred into days as we tracked data, adjusted strategies, and monitored results, and the world outside seemed to recede, leaving only the two of us in the kitchen, surrounded by screens and papers, immersed in a world invisible to anyone else. But the intensity took its toll. I grew restless, exhausted, and sometimes afraid. My friends called, my parents worried, but I felt drawn irresistibly to her side, compelled to follow her guidance even when I did not fully understand the consequences. She noticed my fatigue and would occasionally smile, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Strength comes from persistence," she said softly. "But wisdom comes from knowing when to rest." I nodded, realizing that this journey was as much about personal growth as it was about mastering the digital world. Then, one day, a new challenge appeared, unexpected, mysterious, and deeply unsettling. A series of online anomalies appeared across several platforms, patterns that suggested manipulation, deception, or perhaps something more sinister. My grandmother studied them quietly, her face unreadable. "This is different," she said finally. "You will need every skill you've learned to navigate this. One misstep could cost you everything." I felt a chill in my spine.
For the first time, the thrill of adventure was overshadowed by real fear. This was no longer a controlled environment. We were facing something unpredictable. We worked together methodically, tracing anomalies, analyzing data, and testing hypotheses. She guided me through the process, but she also pushed me to think independently, to make decisions under pressure. I felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror, my mind racing to keep pace with her instructions and the unfolding complexity. Hours turned into days as we tracked patterns, adjusted strategies, and anticipated outcomes, the tension building with every moment. Then, late one night, a breakthrough occurred.
I recognized a subtle trend within the anomalies, something almost invisible to the casual observer. I pointed it out to my grandmother. She studied it closely, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Well done," she said quietly. "You've seen what most would miss. This is the turning point." She explained that this pattern could be leveraged in a way that would produce a significant result, something that could cement our understanding and control of the system we were navigating. My pulse raced, excitement and fear mingling in a potent mix. We executed the plan carefully, following each step precisely. The tension was unbearable, the stakes higher than anything I had experienced. And then, as the final piece fell into place, the results were staggering, an outcome that exceeded even our most optimistic expectations. I felt a rush of triumph, but it was tempered by the awareness of how fragile success could be, how quickly it could be lost if caution was abandoned. That night, as I sat beside my grandmother, watching her review the results, I realized something profound. This was no longer simply about learning to make money online. It was about understanding systems, human behavior, and the delicate balance between risk and reward. It was about seeing opportunities where others saw chaos, acting decisively while maintaining discipline, and recognizing that knowledge alone was insufficient without the courage to apply it. Yet, even in that moment of triumph, an uneasy thought gnawed at me. My grandmother had guided me, mentored me, and pushed me to my limits, but I could not shake the feeling that there was something she had not told me, something hidden behind her calm demeanor and quiet confidence. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, and a reminder that in this world of invisible currents and hidden patterns, not everything could be anticipated or controlled. The following morning, she handed me a small notebook filled with cryptic notes, sketches, and calculations. "This," she said, "is your next lesson. Study it carefully. It contains principles and strategies you must master, but it also contains a challenge. Only those who truly understand can navigate it successfully." I opened the notebook, scanning the pages, and felt a shiver run down my spine. The complexity was immense, the implications vast, and yet I felt a surge of determination. I was no longer the hesitant teenager who had stumbled into the kitchen months ago. I was her apprentice, her partner, and I was ready to face whatever challenge lay ahead. The notebook my grandmother had given me became both my guide and my obsession. Each page was filled with intricate charts, coded messages, and cryptic annotations that seemed almost indecipherable at first glance. Yet I sensed a hidden logic beneath the chaos. For hours, and sometimes entire nights, I pored over its contents, cross-referencing with online data, testing hypotheses, and applying every lesson my grandmother had taught me. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and intoxicating all at once, a mixture of fear and exhilaration that I had never experienced before. She watched me with her usual calm, occasionally leaning over my shoulder to point out subtle details I had overlooked. "Notice the correlation here," she said one evening, tapping a series of numbers. "Most people would dismiss this as random noise, but patterns exist even in apparent chaos. Learn to see them." Her voice was soft, but there was an urgency beneath it, a sense that she was preparing me for something beyond ordinary comprehension. Weeks passed, and my skills grew sharper, my intuition keener. I began to anticipate shifts before they happened, to recognize anomalies almost instinctively. The digital world that had once seemed impenetrable now felt like a second home, a place where I could navigate with confidence and precision. Yet, the deeper I delved, the more I realized that power came with responsibility, and that mistakes, even small ones, could carry consequences far beyond my imagination. Then came the day that changed everything. I had been following a minor trend on a platform I barely understood, analyzing fluctuations that seemed insignificant, when I noticed a strange pattern emerging, something deliberate, almost orchestrated. I alerted my grandmother, who studied it silently, her fingers drumming lightly on the edge of the desk. "Interesting," she murmured. "This is no ordinary pattern. Someone, or something, is manipulating events at a scale we have not encountered before." The realization sent a shiver down my spine. The stakes were higher than anything I had faced. This was no longer a controlled exercise. It was a real challenge, a test of everything I had learned. My grandmother instructed me to observe carefully, to take note of every detail, every subtle shift, and every anomaly. "We must understand the rules before we can play the game," she said, her eyes sharp with intensity. Days of meticulous observation followed. We traced the pattern across multiple platforms, piecing together fragments of information, testing theories, and analyzing the behavior of users, algorithms, and digital signals. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally, but I felt alive in a way I had never felt before. Each discovery, each insight, was a thrill, a confirmation that I was learning to see the hidden structures of the world, to navigate complexity with skill and precision. Yet, even as we worked, unease grew. The pattern was unlike anything my grandmother had encountered in decades of experience. It was intricate, it's subtle, and unpredictable, it's suggesting a level of control and foresight that was almost unnerving. I began to feel a sense of vulnerability. It's a creeping doubt that perhaps we were in over our heads. My grandmother, however, remained composed, her calm presence a steady anchor amidst the uncertainty. One night, as I sat exhausted at the desk, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes distant. "You have done well," she said softly. "But the final lesson is not about skill or knowledge. It is about trust, courage, and understanding the consequences of choice. Are you ready for that?" I nodded, though a knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I had faced challenges before, but her words hinted at something deeper, something I could not yet grasp. She handed me a small envelope, sealed with a symbol I did not recognize. "Open this when you are alone," she instructed. "It contains the key to the final stage." I waited until the house was silent, my parents asleep, my grandmother elsewhere in the night, before I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a USB drive, labeled simply with my initials. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop, and the screen immediately lit up with files, folders, and encrypted messages. It was a labyrinth of data, far more complex than anything we had worked with before. As I navigated the files, a message appeared. "Welcome to the ultimate test. Your actions will determine the outcome. Choose wisely. My pulse raced. The interface was sophisticated, almost surreal, and I felt a strange thrill mingled with fear. Every decision I made now seemed consequential, as if the digital world were holding its breath, waiting for my next move. For hours, I worked methodically, analyzing data, testing scenarios, and applying every lesson my grandmother had taught me. Patterns emerged, connections became visible, and I felt a surge of confidence. Yet, the deeper I went, the more I realized that this was not just a challenge of intellect. It was a test of judgment, intuition, and character. One wrong choice could unravel everything we had built, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on me. Suddenly, an unexpected alert flashed across the screen. A notification of activity I had not anticipated. A shift in the digital environment that threatened to undo hours of careful work. My hands shook as I assessed the situation. I remembered my grandmother's advice. Do not act hastily. Observe, analyze, and respond with clarity. I took a deep breath, forced my mind to focus, and carefully implemented a corrective measure. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity. When the system finally stabilized, I felt a wave of relief and exhilaration. I had navigated the challenge successfully, yet the experience left me shaken, acutely aware of the fragility of our control and the magnitude of the stakes. My grandmother entered the room quietly, her expression unreadable. She studied my work, her eyes scanning the screen, and then she nodded slowly. "You have done well," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "You are ready for the final lesson." That night, she revealed the truth I had been sensing but could not fully comprehend. The anomalies, the patterns, the ultimate test, it was all part of a system she had built and refined over decades. A network of knowledge, strategy, and observation designed to teach, challenge, and ultimately transform. "This world is more complex than most can imagine," she said softly. "And knowledge alone is not enough. You must understand consequence, choice, and responsibility. Only then can you truly master it." I listened, awed, and a sense of anticipation grew within me. The lessons had been rigorous, exhausting, and exhilarating, but they had also been deeply transformative. I realized that I had changed, not just in skill, but in perspective, in understanding, and in the awareness of the delicate balance between risk and reward. Then came the moment that shattered my expectations entirely. My grandmother handed me a final file, encrypted and heavily secured. "Open this," she said, "but be prepared. What you see will challenge everything you know." My hands trembled as I double-clicked, and the screen filled with a single, startling message. "I am leaving. I have chosen a new path. If you wish to continue, the system is yours. But so is the consequence." I froze, staring at the screen, my mind racing. She was gone. Not physically, not literally, but in a way that transcended comprehension. The systems, the knowledge, the strategies, all hers, were now in my hands. The realization was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. The woman who had taught me everything, guided me, and challenged me had stepped into a world I could not yet follow, leaving me to navigate the consequences of our shared work. I felt a complex mix of emotions: awe at her ingenuity, fear at the responsibility she had entrusted to me, and a strange, bitter thrill at the magnitude of the challenge ahead.
The digital world she had revealed was mine to explore, manipulate, and master. But the absence of her presence was a void I could not fill. Yet, even in that uncertainty, I recognized the ultimate truth she had imparted. Mastery was not about power alone. It was about courage, judgment, and the willingness to face the unknown. As I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by screens and papers, I felt a sudden clarity. The lessons, the challenges, the trials, all had prepared me for this moment. I was no longer merely an observer.
I was an actor in a vast, complex system, capable of shaping outcomes, influencing decisions, and navigating the unseen currents of a world that most could not even perceive. And though fear lingered, a spark of exhilaration flared within me, a recognition that I had inherited not just knowledge, but the courage to wield it. The next morning, the house was quiet. My grandmother was gone, leaving only a note. Follow your path. Trust your instincts. Remember the lessons. The world is waiting. I held the note in my hands, feeling the weight of her presence even in absence, and I knew that everything had changed. I was no longer a student, no longer a novice, but a participant in a system she had mastered, and the consequences, whether thrilling or terrifying, were mine to navigate. And so began my journey, alone yet empowered, fearful yet exhilarated, aware that every choice carried consequence, every action rippled through the unseen currents of a world she had revealed. I had been taught by the most unexpected mentor imaginable, a 75-year-old grandmother whose curiosity, courage, and ingenuity had reshaped my life forever. And now, it was up to me to continue, to explore, to master, and perhaps, one day, to understand fully the depth of what she had left behind.